Harold Carter was no stranger to the sound of metal clashing against steel, to the smell of engine oil and scorched rubber. He was a seasoned mechanic, the owner of a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of Millbrook, a town that seemed peaceful on the surface but was rotten underneath. That day, golden sunlight streamed through the open shutters, landing on Harold's graying hair. The Toyota Camry in front of him seemed to have a busted water pump, not a tough diagnosis for a man who had survived the Vietnam War and spent over 40 years under the hoods of cars. The door opened with a familiar ding. He didn't look up, still wrestling with a stubborn bolt. "Be right there," he said, his voice deep and warm. But when the reply came, everything changed.
"Take your time, old man.
"We've got all day." Harold instantly recognized the voice, James Blake, police officer, and the face of corruption in Millbrook. He turned around. 3 men in police uniforms stood inside the shop. Blake, tall, with cropped blonde hair and eyes cold as stone, stood in the middle. His hands were on his hips like he owned the place. "Your shop's been around a long time, Carter," Blake said, his eyes scanning the room like a predator.
40-something years.
43, Harold replied, still gripping the wrench.
I make an honest living.
No drugs, no laundering, no extortion.
Blake gave at a smile.
Times have changed.
Little place like yours, they don't last without protection.
I mean, community support.
Harold understood all too well.
He'd heard the stories, small shops being forced to pay protection fees unless they wanted surprise inspections, vandalism, or to simply vanish without a trace. "I don't need protection. I need justice," he said, eyes locked on Blake. The air in the shop thickened. Walker, the youngest officer, shifted uncomfortably. Thompson, the other cop, stood still, hands on his belt.
Blake stepped closer.
Very close. Then whispered, "500 a month, Carter. Or one day your shop might go up in flames from an electrical mishap. Or a customer's car might get tagged with spray paint. We'd hate for that to happen." Harold was silent for a long moment. Then he lowered the wrench, wiped his hands on a red rag, and said, "I've faced men with real guns, not punks in uniforms trying to scare old folks.
If you want to burn down my shop, go ahead.
But don't expect me to bow." Blake's hand tightened on his holster. But he didn't draw. Finally, he signaled the others to leave. Before stepping out the door, he turned back.
"I warned you, Carter.
No one goes against us and stays safe in Millbrook." As the sound of the patrol car faded down the narrow alley, Harold stood still. There was no fear in his eyes. Only a clear decision. He walked into the office, picked up the landline, and dialed an old number. A deep voice answered on the other end. "Dad." Harold looked out the window, where the sunlight was slowly fading behind the rooftops. "Damen." They came. "Just like you said. And just like you taught me, sometimes, no one comes to help.
Except your own son."
There was a brief pause on the other end. Then the voice of Colonel Damen Carter, known as the Ghost, came through, sharp as a blade.
"Stay calm, Dad.
Don't answer any more calls.
Lock the doors. And leave the rest to me."
Colonel Damen Carter, codenamed the Ghost, stood still before a digital map filled with coordinates and interference signals. Under the screen's faint blue glow, his face looked like it had been forged from steel. "Alpha target is in position," a soft female voice whispered in his ear through the earpiece. It was Captain Sarah Williams, Deputy Commander of the Delta Force Unit. "Stand by," Damen replied curtly, eyes never leaving the map. "Action order in 3 minutes." Everything was going according to plan. Until a top priority alert popped up on his personal screen. "Family call, red code priority." Damen Frotze. Only 3 people in the world had that code. And only one of them would call at this hour, his father, Harold Carter. He motioned for Williams to assume command, then stepped into the secure communication room. "Dad," he said, voice lowered. "You once told me, if the day ever came when Millbrook called your name, don't hesitate," Harold's voice came through, rough and deep. "That day is today." Damen was silent, his hand clenched into a fist. "Who?" "Blake. And his pack of dirty cops. They want my shop. I refused. By tomorrow morning, they might come back with a warrant." The entire room seemed to grow colder. I'm coming home, Damen said flatly. Not with bullets or firepower. Not yet. I need to know who's behind them. Who's kept them alive this long? Damen, don't do anything reckless. I'm not being reckless. But I'm the last person they should have provoked. 15 minutes later, Captain Williams walked in, her expression cautious. Everything all right, Ghost? Damen gave a single nod. You'll finish this up. I'm leaving the base in 30 minutes. Williams frowned. Orders from who? From my father. And from Justice. She looked like she was about to object but fell silent when she saw Damon's eyes. These weren't the eyes of a man retreating. They were the eyes of a ghost on the hunt. God help them, she murmured. Damen turned to leave, but paused at the door. Williams, have Foster track all suspicious financial transactions from Millbrook. Internal transfers, unexplained wire activity, sudden asset spikes. I want to know who's feeding those dogs. Yes, Commander. And then, Damen Carter disappeared into the night, like a ghost leaving its nest. Millbrook, the next morning. Blake sipped his coffee in his office, flipping through a report on yesterday's minor encounter with Harold Carter. Just an old man, he muttered. We've dealt with dozens like him. Until Parker, the new recruit, knocked on the door. Boss, there's something. I looked into Mr. Carter's background. He's not just some mechanic. Blake frowned. What are you saying? Parker swallowed. His son is Colonel Damen Carter. Codename the Ghost. Delta Force. One of the best covert ops officers in the country. Blake scoffed. Military bedtime stories. No, sir. I heard about that case in Bogota, 2 years ago. An entire human trafficking network collapsed in 2 nights. No traces. No bodies. They say. Ghost did it. Blake slowly set his coffee down. For the first time, something unfamiliar stirred in his chest. It wasn't anger. It was fear. Double the surveillance on Carter's shop. Post someone at his house. If the son's really coming back to town. I want to know before he sets foot at the airport. What Blake didn't know was, Ghost was already back. And Millbrook would never be the same again. Streetlights flickered outside Carter's auto repair, once Harold Carter's pride, now looking like a war zone after a quiet raid. But inside, the silence didn't last. A shadow slipped through the broken window. No weapons. No squad. Just one man. And a plan. Colonel Damen Carter. He checked every corner, every spray-painted tag and footprint on the oil-streaked floor. He wasn't looking for clues, he was confirming. This was a coordinated act. The team was semi-professional. Not amateurs, but not elite killers either. They've done this before, Damen muttered, brushing his fingers across the remains of a smashed security light. And they've been protected. He pressed a small button beneath his wrist. A red dot appeared on his watch screen. Satellite connection established. At a hidden outpost 600 kilometers away, Foster, the tech operative, monitored everything from a temporary command post. Ghost, I've got your signal. You're at the shop. Confirmed. Start accessing city cameras. Look for any police cruisers near 8th and Jefferson between midnight and 3 o'clock. Copy that. Anything else? Pull James Blake's bank records, last 6 months. Focus on transfers from shell companies. Foster was quiet for a few seconds. Yeah, got something. A series of transfers from a company called Millbrook Civic Security LLC, headquartered at an abandoned car wash. Damen smirked. Smart men don't carry wallets made of newspaper. He's not smart. Millbrook Police HQ, the next morning. James Blake entered his office, exhausted, eyes bloodshot. Before he could sit down, something waited on his desk. An envelope. No sender. No prints. Inside were photos. A picture of Blake holding an envelope of cash. A bank statement. And finally, a photo of his daughter in her college dorm, taken that very morning. Blake turned pale. A message was attached. I know who you are. I know what you've done. And I know the one thing you're afraid to lose. He jumped to his feet and rushed to the director's office. We have a problem, he said. Carter. Anderson asked.
No.
Carter's kid. The ghost. He's here. Director Anderson, a man who had sat comfortably on his throne of power for 15 years, suddenly felt the seat beneath him grow cold. So what do we do? Call the ones above. Call the organization. We need people who can wipe everything clean. Not just him. The old man too. Anderson nodded reluctantly. What he didn't know was, every word he spoke had been recorded. A small device had been planted under the table, right where Damen once accidentally sat last year to file a fake vehicle damage report. Later that night, a small motel on the edge of Millbrook. Rachel Turner, the independent journalist who nearly lost her job investigating Millbrook PD, opened her laptop. She had just received an anonymous email. Inside were an audio file of the conversation between Blake and Anderson, financial evidence linking to Millbrook Civic Security LLC, a list of businesses that had paid protection fees. With one note: you want the truth? This is the beginning. But be careful, snakes bite when cornered. Rachel sat in silence. She didn't know who sent it. But in her heart, she knew. The ghost that thugs feared was the ally she needed. Streetlights flickered outside Carter's auto repair, once Harold Carter's pride, now looking like a battlefield abandoned after a silent raid. But inside, the silence didn't last. A shadow quietly stepped through the shattered window. No weapons. No squad. Just one man, and a plan.
Colonel Damen Carter.
He inspected every corner, every streak of spray paint and footprint on the oil-stained floor. He wasn't searching for clues, he was confirming. This was a coordinated act. The team behind it was semi-professional. Not a bunch of aimless thugs, but not elite assassins either. They've done this before, Damen muttered, his fingers brushing the remains of a smashed security light. And they're used to being protected. He pressed a small button under his wrist. A red dot lit up on his watch screen. Satellite link established. At a secret location 600 kilometers away, Foster, tech specialist, was monitoring from a mobile command center. Ghost, I've got your signal. You're at the shop. Confirmed. Start pulling city cam footage. I want every police vehicle that passed near the intersection of 8th and Jefferson between midnight and 3 o'clock. Understood. Anything else? Check James Blake's bank accounts for the last 6 months. Focus on transfers from shell companies. Foster was silent for a few seconds. Well, we've got something. A series of transfers from a company called Millbrook Civic Security LLC, based out of an abandoned car wash.
Damen smirked.
Smart men don't use wallets made of newspaper. He's not smart. Millbrook Police Headquarters, the next morning. James Blake walked into his office, tired, eyes bloodshot. Before he could sit down, something was already waiting on his desk. An envelope.
No sender. No prints.
Inside were photographs. A photo of Blake holding an envelope of cash. A copy of a bank statement. And finally, a photo of his daughter, at her college dorm. Taken that very morning. Blake went pale. A note was attached. I know who you are. I know what you've done. And I know the one thing you're afraid to lose. He shot to his feet and rushed into the director's office. We've got a problem, he said. Carter? Asked Anderson.
No.
Carter's kid. The ghost. He's here. Director Anderson, a man who had ruled from his throne for 15 years, suddenly felt the seat beneath him turn cold. So what do we do? Call the people upstairs. Call the organization. We need someone who can erase everything. Not just him. The old man too. Anderson nodded reluctantly. But what he didn't know was, every word he had spoken had been recorded. A small device had been planted under his desk, the very spot where Damen had once accidentally sat to report a fake vehicle issue last year. Later that night, at a small motel on the edge of Millbrook, Rachel Turner, the independent journalist who had nearly lost her career exposing Millbrook PD, opened her laptop. She had just received an anonymous email. Inside, an audio file of the conversation between Blake and Anderson. Financial evidence tied to Millbrook Civic Security LLC. A list of businesses that had paid protection fees. And one line of text. You want the truth? This is the beginning. But be careful, snakes bite when cornered. Rachel sat frozen. She didn't know who had sent it. But deep down, she knew. The ghost that thugs feared was the ally she needed. In the sheriff's office, Chief Anderson had just received an urgent report. The internal server system had crashed. Security camera footage from the past week, completely erased. Timekeeping servers, wiped clean. The internal network was detecting unauthorized access from within. Anderson slammed his fist on the desk. Who's in charge of the security system? Officer Parker, sir. Ryan Parker, the young officer whom Damen Carter had begun turning into an inside man within the department. Anderson called Parker up to his office. Someone's breaching the system. Do your job. Ryan nodded. But as he left the room, he typed a single line into the encrypted phone Damen had given him. Good morning, Ghost. All going to plan. They're panicking. At an abandoned warehouse, Damen Carter's temporary base. Damen sat before a field operations console with 3 monitors. Beside him were tech operative Foster and his former team leader from classified missions, Sarah Williams. They're trying to reboot from an external backup, Foster said, fingers flying across the keyboard. Too late. We took control last night. Sarah gave a faint smirk. Millbrook PD thinks they're playing cat and mouse. They forgot they're the mice. Damen nodded. Today, we don't attack with bullets. We attack their trust. He turned to Foster. Send the decoy report. 10:22 a.m., the internal inbox of the entire Millbrook Police Department pinged with an anonymous email. Subject line. Internal investigation findings. List of officers to be indicted in federal probe. Attached, a list of 23 names. Some were known veterans of the force, but others were innocents. Some truly corrupt, and some who had merely stayed silent. Each officer who opened the email saw their name listed, alongside a few others missing. A psychological trap. A simple weapon, divide and conquer. Immediately, chaos erupted inside the station. Some began deleting files. Others called their lawyers. A few rushed to Anderson's office, hoping to secure their protection. Meanwhile, Damen quietly launched Phase 2 of the attack. A video. Footage from a hidden camera captured a private meeting between Blake and a representative from a shell real estate company, showing Blake receiving a suitcase of cash to pressure local businesses into selling their land. The video was ready, but not released yet. Damen turned to Sarah. Let them panic for one more day. Tomorrow the video drops, right in front of City Hall. At the same time, Rachel Turner was following the money. After Damen provided her with new files, she discovered. The real estate firm Everwell Holdings was a front. The parent company was based in the Cayman Islands. One of the accounts funneling money into it? A public fund, the Millbrook Community Welfare Foundation, funded by the city government. She froze. They're using the people's money to force the people out of their own homes. That night, at Ryan Parker's home, Ryan sat at a small desk, hands trembling. He hesitated. But then, his phone buzzed. A message from Damen. Ryan. You once asked me, do you think I have what it takes to change the system? The answer, no, not if you go alone. But you have me. And thousands out there waiting for someone to fire the first shot. Will it be you? Ryan looked out the window. A patrol car passed by slowly, Blake behind the wheel. Ryan's eyes changed. He stood up, opened his safe, and took out a full backup of 3 years' worth of internal records. Then, he began the upload. Chief Anderson pulled out an unregistered phone, its SIM card meant for one-time use only. After 3 rings, a gravelly voice answered on the other end. What do you need? Carter. The son. He's throwing everything into chaos. I need a team, one that knows how to finish things. There was silence. Then, I'll send a few wolves. But remember, what you're buying is my silence.
No negociation.
Anderson hung up, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air-conditioned room. He had just wagered his career, and his life, on ghosts that didn't exist in any personnel file. 2312, Outskirts Warehouse, Damen Carter's temporary base. Sarah Williams stared at the screen, tension etched on her face. We've got movement. 3 black SUVs approached the edge of town, with fake license plates, bypassing every checkpoint. Foster ran a quick scan. 4 biological signatures. All show advanced training, steady heart rates, low reflex delay. Former mercs or foreign special ops. Damen nodded. They're not here to talk. He switched the camera feed to a street near Harold's auto repair shop, where the Carter tactical team had already installed a covert defense system. 1:03 a.m., outside Harold Carter's repair shop. 4 men in black, armed with suppressors and infrared goggles, approached from 3 directions. What they didn't know was this. Every step they took was being tracked. As the lead attacker knelt to place a charge on the back door, a voice rang out from the darkness. Step back. You're standing on a laser mine. The 4 froze. A thin red laser beam sliced through the dark, then all the floodlights snapped on at once. Damen stepped out from behind a truck, his M1911 in hand, but not raised. You're not bad soldiers. But you have no idea who you're up against. The mercenaries looked at one another. Clearly, they hadn't been warned about the ghost. Damen gave a signal. From the rooftop, Sarah and 2 other operatives rappelled down, subduing all 4 men in just 9 seconds. Keep them alive, Damen ordered. I want to know who paid for this stupid little game. 4:40 a.m., Millbrook Police Headquarters. Blake walked into his office, but before he could sit, a photograph was already lying on his desk. A crystal-clear image. Blake shaking hands with one of the mercenaries, Anderson standing right beside him. The angle was from 12 meters above, a military-grade drone. Taped to the back was a simple message. You've chosen a side. This is your last chance to switch. Blake's hands trembled as he looked around. No security camera had recorded the photo being placed. Ghost had been inside the building. At the same time, Millbrook City Hall. Rachel Turner received a fax. Anonymous. It was a copy of Mayor Gregory's confidential expenditure files. The money trail led to Special Security Services, with timestamps that perfectly matched the mercenary operation. Rachel whispered. The city government hired assassins to eliminate its own citizens. Next morning, emergency meeting of the city council. When Chief Anderson walked in, every council member already had a copy of a video confession, one of the mercenaries identifying him as the one who hired them. No one looked at him as the sheriff anymore. Mayor Gregory sighed, then turned to his aide and gave a quiet order. Call the FBI. The game is over. Police Chief William Anderson sat alone in his office, the flickering fluorescent light reflecting off his sweat-streaked, tense face. The cigarette in his hand trembled slightly, ash falling to the floor unnoticed. On his desk lay an unregistered phone with a fresh burner SIM card inserted. He dialed a number, his hand shaking slightly, then brought the phone to his ear. After 3 rings, a deep razor-sharp voice came through the line. Speak. We have a problem, Anderson replied, swallowing dryly. Carter's son Damen, he's tearing everything apart. I need a team. Not cops. People who work, quietly and thoroughly. There was a long pause. Then the voice returned, cold as ice. I'll send a team. But make this clear, loyalty isn't part of the deal. You pay, they clean up. No questions.
No traces.
And if you fail, I'll be the one sending the next team. But you'll be the target. The call ended. Anderson leaned back, drained his glass of whiskey, and stared blankly at the wall. The nightmare had just begun. At the same time, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Colonel Damen Carter stood before a large screen displaying a live satellite map. His team, former special operatives, analysts, and technicians he trusted with his life, were all in place, each focused on their role. Williams, his second-in-command, approached. 3 black SUVs just crossed the northern perimeter of town. No official plates, low-frequency signal jammers, military breach pattern. Definitely not civilians. Damen glanced briefly at the screen. White's people.
No.
These are mercenaries. High skill. The kind you hire when you want no one left to talk. Damen turned to Foster, his comms tech. Activate the defense perimeter around my father's garage. I want every step they take recorded from the moment their boots hit the sidewalk. Foster nodded and began working. Everyone understood, tonight, the men sent to end this story might end up telling it in prison, if they survived. Around 1 a.m., Carter's auto repair. The night was unnaturally still. The faded yellow streetlight barely lit the shadows behind the garage. One mercenary slid over the fence, landing as silently as a cat. Behind him, 3 others took up tactical positions. They didn't know that from the moment they entered the perimeter, they were being tracked by thermal sensors mounted on the roof. The first merc reached the back door, crouched, and began setting explosives. At that exact moment, a calm, deep voice echoed from hidden speakers, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere, like the darkness itself was speaking. "Take one more step, and your left leg won't be intact." The merc froze. He looked down. A laser beam, thin as a hair, shone straight across his ankle. He hissed, stunned speechless. Instantly, every floodlight around the shop blazed to life. Not harsh or blinding, but tactical lighting, shining straight into the intruder's eyes, destroying their night vision. Damen Carter stepped out from behind a parked truck, dressed in black. He carried no exposed weapon, but his stance alone made the 4 mercenaries freeze like statues. "I know who hired you. I know the exact route you took to get here. And I know that your weapons were swapped for rubber rounds while you were asleep in your motel last night." One merc stammered, panic flooding his eyes. We were just following a contract." "I don't care about excuses." Damen took a step forward, voice lowering. "But I'll give you a choice. Cooperate, or disappear like the trash you represent." Before any of them could respond, the side doors to the garage burst open. From the shadows, 3 special operatives rappelled down on ropes, fully armed.
No gunfire. No shouting.
Just the hiss of rope, and the cold clink of metal cuffs locking down. 12 seconds later, the entire team of mercenaries was subdued. At dawn, the mercenaries were loaded into an armored van. Foster sent out an immediate report, complete footage of the infiltration, Damen's warning, and the flawless takedown by the Special Ops team. All of it was forwarded directly to the FBI and the Department of Justice. At the sheriff's office, James Blake walked into his office. On his desk was a black envelope. He opened it. A photograph slipped out. It showed him, shaking hands with one of the mercenaries caught the night before. From the angle and clarity, it could only have been taken by a military-grade drone. Beneath the photo was a note. "You have 3 days to choose a side. After that, no one will ask." At the local newspaper office, Rachel Turner received a fax from an anonymous source. It was a copy of the city budget's financial statement. A single line stood out. Funds allocated to diplomatic security services exactly matched the timeline of the mercenary team's arrival, hired by Anderson. Rachel exhaled sharply and whispered, "The government hired assassins to eliminate a citizen. This isn't corruption anymore. This is treason." Later that afternoon, emergency meeting at City Hall. Anderson sat in a corner, sweat soaking his collar. On the giant screen at the front of the chamber, the video sent by Damen played for the second time. It showed the mercenaries being captured alive. A confession from one, naming Anderson as the one who hired them. A recorded audio of Anderson's midnight phone call. Mayor Gregory, pale-faced, slumped in his chair. "Oh my God," he whispered. He really called in the ghost. No one said a word. But everyone understood. The power game in Millbrook had changed. And the man holding the cards now was someone no one dared speak of aloud. The ghost. In an underground room fortified with steel walls and the most advanced anti-surveillance systems available, Thomas Gregory, mayor of Millbrook, entered with a hardened expression. Behind him was Police Chief William Anderson. Only one man was waiting inside. Alexander White. The man sat motionless in a high-end leather chair, the picture of composure, as if he were sipping tea rather than commanding one of the most powerful criminal networks in the United States. His silver hair was neatly cut, his cold, stone-gray eyes drifting toward the 2 who had just entered. "You ruined everything," White said, his voice flat and measured, each word striking like a hammer against steel. Anderson lowered his head, sweat collecting at the back of his neck. Gregory tried to keep calm, but his hand clenched the folder so tightly the paper nearly tore. "Damen Carter isn't just another operative," Gregory spoke up. "He's a symbol. The public sees him as a hero. Every move he makes is unraveling the system we spent 15 years building. White gave a thin, icy smile. So you thought hiring a few cheap mercs would be enough to clean things up? And instead, he captures them, alive, and live streams it to the feds? You've turned Millbrook into a campaign slogan for the reformists. We need a different approach. Gregory swallowed. If we don't stop Carter now, he'll drag your entire network into the light. Not just Millbrook, Dallas, Denver, Baltimore. White stood and stepped over to a digital map on the wall. He tapped a control, and the screen lit up with red zones, small towns across the country where his organization held dominion. One speck of dust, and you let it become a storm. He turned back, eyes narrowing like a predator. But if the storm has come, then it's time the people remembered what fear looks like. At Damen Carter's temporary base, alerts poured in. Reports of strange violence in surrounding towns, arson, disappearances, broken communications with local police. No one had confirmed it officially, but all signs pointed to the same man. White had made his move. In a corner of the room, Foster stared at the satellite data scrolling across the screen. Sir. White's doing exactly what we feared. He's breaking the rules. No more secrecy. He's fighting back with civilian terrorism. Damen rose slowly, like a coiled spring about to snap. He wants to spread fear, crush hope before it takes root. Williams nodded. Then we do the opposite. We fight fear with courage. Damen turned toward the board in front of him, a map of towns now under threat. He looked to Foster. Pull up the list of the most vulnerable towns. Send rapid response units. We don't wait. We strike first. Back in Millbrook, Harold Carter stepped out of his shop carrying an old tool bag. He didn't say much. Didn't act like a hero. But each step he took along the sidewalk made nearby citizens nod quietly. They knew he was the one who started all of this. A teenager approached him. Is there anything I can do to help, Mr. Carter? Harold smiled, placing a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. You can remember this. Standing up for what's right is never wrong. Even if you pay the price. Even if you stand alone. But one day, you'll find you were never alone at all. Back at the underground base, Damen turned to Foster. Give me the latest intel on White. Every transaction. Every route. Every base. I don't want to capture him. I want to erase him from every system in existence. Foster looked up, eyes gleaming like a radar lock. We've found his financial hub. A private bank in Switzerland, tied to at least 3 shell companies operating inside the U.S. Damen nodded. Good. Start there. Cut the money. Hit his hand before he can lift the knife. Williams let out a cold, sharp smile. We've got the weapons. We've got the truth. And now, we've got the people behind us. He may have blades, but we have the light. And you know, she looked at Damen.
No darkness lasts forever.
Damen clenched his fist. This isn't just about protecting Millbrook anymore. This is about sending a message to those who hide in the shadows. This time, the monsters are the ones being hunted. In a strategic operations room deep within Damen Carter's temporary base, a massive LED screen displayed a map of the United States. Red dots gradually appeared, not enemy bases, but towns where citizens had begun to rise up. From distant Silver Creek, Montana to the port town of Charleston, South Carolina, once silent communities were now speaking out. And it had all started with Millbrook. Damen stood before the map, his gaze sharp as a blade. Beside him, Captain Sarah Williams, face hard as steel, but with a glint of hope in her eyes, watched closely. We're taking back the initiative, Williams said, her hand resting on a new orange-highlighted area in southern Texas. A group of veterans just seized control of their town's police department after uncovering documents tied to White. From the control desk, Foster added his report. 3 banks connected to White have had their assets frozen. His shell companies are collapsing, no more capital flow. Damen nodded, his voice low and resolute. Good. He can't fuel the machine if we cut off the gas. Suddenly, Foster's expression darkened as he noticed a new data stream. Wait. We have a problem. Williams turned.
What is it?
One of White's accounts just made a transaction, not through the banks, but via physical cash. Millions of dollars, routed to a private airstrip in Arizona. Damon narrowed his eyes. He's relocating. Running. No, Foster corrected, adjusting the satellite feed.
Not running. Regrouping.
The screen lit up with the image of an abandoned hangar, now renovated into a warehouse. Thermal scans revealed at least 20 armed individuals inside. Among them, White.
Damen exhaled, lips pressed tight.
He's preparing his final strike. Williams nodded slowly. And he knows this is all in. Meanwhile, in a secured briefing room in Washington, D.C., a crisis meeting had been convened. Representatives from the Department of Justice, FBI, and NSA sat around the table. On screen, Damen Carter, connected through an encrypted line. This isn't just a criminal syndicate anymore, Damen said. It's a strategic-level network capable of destabilizing local governments. If we let him strike back, the entire campaign collapses. One official asked, "Then what do you propose, Colonel?" Damen didn't hesitate.
I need authority to coordinate a multi-agency task force. Codename, Changing Wind.
The room fell silent. Then a deep voice from the shadows spoke, the director of the FBI.
You have it, Carter.
And I'll personally oversee the operation. 2 days later, near the New Mexico border, Operation Changing Wind came to life. A coalition of special forces, cyber engineers, financial analysts, and data experts assembled, working alongside Damen's original team. Foster addressed the group.
Primary target, Alexander White.
We strike from 3 angles: his financial infrastructure, weapon supply lines, and his current stronghold in Arizona.
Williams stepped forward. My team meets the warehouse.
Carter leads the decapitation unit. No capture if they resist. A young officer raised his hand. What about civilians? Hostages may be inside. Damen met his eyes.
We leave no one behind.
But if we must choose between peace and truth, what do we choose? The room echoed. Truth.
The night before the operation, Damen sat alone in the barrack.
On the table before him lay an old photo, he and his father in uniform, standing beside a dusty jeep at a military outpost. Harold walked in, carrying his familiar tool bag.
Do you think you have a shot, Dad?
Damen asked without looking up.
Harold sat down, breathing slow and deep.
I used to think fighting in the jungles of Vietnam was the hardest thing I'd ever do. But no, the hardest battlefield is the one where you fight to save the soul of a community.
Out there, the enemy doesn't wear a uniform.
And bullets come in the form of words, money, and broken laws. Damen nodded slightly.
I'm not fighting for revenge.
I just refuse to lose. Harold smirked. Then you really are my son. At dawn, Operation Changing Wind launched. Special Forces teams moved silently along routes mapped by Foster, surrounding the warehouse where White had dug in.
Drone soared eye overhead, invisible sentinelle.
Tech squads jammed all communications, locking out digital access. Inside, Alexander White stood at a tactical table, surrounded by armed guards. He knew what was coming. He saw it all unfolding. And still, he smiled. So you came, Carter, he whispered. Let's see who really runs the world. Outside the compound, Damen gave the order. Breach. The steel doors exploded open.
Dark silhouette poured in. The final battle had begun.
The abandoned warehouse on the edge of the Arizona desert held its breath in the moment before the storm. After Damen's order, all teams moved at once. The soft hiss of zip lines, metal brushing against concrete, footsteps quiet as breath, together they formed a modern symphony of war. Inside, Alexander White, leader of the syndicate, replayed an old video of Harold Carter standing in his garage years ago, at the beginning of it all. White's eyes didn't show hatred, only cold contempt. These people think one righteous act can change the world, he muttered. They're wrong.
The world doesn't need heroes.
It needs order. And I am order.
The west steel door blew open.
White looked up, smirking.
Welcome, Carter.
Damen led the assault team, slipping through the dim hallway lit by emergency lights. Every step was calculated, every blind spot covered. The operatives beside him moved like shadows, swift and silent. Second floor, 3 armed hostiles, Foster reported from the command vehicle.
Basement, life signe detected.
Female voice identified.
Possible match, journaliste Rachel Turner.
Damon gripped his rifle tighter.
Williams, clear the second floor. À meeting tous basement.
I'm with you, came another voice. Ryan Parker, former Millbrook officer, now deputy commander. Damon glanced at him. You sure? More than sure. The basement was a maze, once part of an old military ventilation system, now repurposed by White into a personal prison. The walls were coated in desert dust, lights flickering like they were burning out. In a small room, Rachel Turner sat tied to a chair. Her lip was bloodied, but her eyes burned bright. A mercenary stood guard outside, MP7 in hand. He never even turned before Damon took him down, silent as a ghost.
You all right. Damen whispered, cutting her loose.
Take a guess, Rachel smirked, wiping her lip. I've already got a new story. You had me worried. He helped her up. We need to move. White's not finished. You think he'll run? She asked. Damon shook his head.
No.
He's waiting for me. Upstairs, the firefight had begun. Williams led the SWAT team into the control center as White's mercenaries fought back desperately. In the top-floor office, White monitored everything through surveillance screens. He sat upright, hands folded, eyes fixed on a single image, Damen Carter escorting Rachel Turner out of the basement. Good. Very good, he whispered. He walked to a small safe, opened it. Inside, a biometric-triggered explosive device. Damon and Rachel had just reached the stairs when Foster's voice came through the earpiece. Alert! Detected Level 4 explosive signature. Biometric lock. White may be preparing a burn protocol. We can't let him do that, Damon growled.
No time for remote disable.
You'll have to reach him directly. Damon turned to Rachel.
Run to the back exit. Williams will get you out.
She started to argue, but his look silenced her. I'll tell this story, she said quietly. And I'll give you the ending. On the top floor, White poured himself a glass of whiskey, standing by the tall window facing the desert. How long did it take you to get here? He asked as Damon stepped in. Long enough to know you're not in this for the money, Damon replied. White turned, smiling bitterly. Money is just a tool.
I sell belief. I sell stability. And you've torn it down.
Do you think the people can govern themselves? It's not my job to teach them how, Damon said. It's my job to clear the way so they can. White placed his hand on the explosive. One of us doesn't leave this room. You're right, Damon said, stepping forward. But you don't get to decide that. Suddenly, a glint of light flashed behind White. Foster had accessed the building's security feed and marked a clear shot. A sniper from Williams' team fired cleanly through the glass wall. The bullet struck White's wrist, sending the device clattering to the ground, unarmed. Damon lunged, pinning him down in seconds. White collapsed, laughing bitterly.
I built an empire in my lifetime.
You destroyed it in a month.
Damen spoke softly.
It wasn't me. It was my father. A mechanic who said no.
The battle was over.
White was captured alive. All evidence was secured.